Hey, beloved. I'm Lindsay P.H. Jackson, and this is Unlearning. In every episode, we explore the uncomfortable conversations you want in this safe container for ideas that you know and trust, magically weaving together storytelling, poetry, music, and panel discussions with expert guests. Unlearning is the only safe place to tackle the taboo conversations and questions that most hosts are too scared to take on. In a world where division is driving a wedge between workplaces and dinner tables, it is time to get uncomfortable and unlearn together. Let's take a deep breath together, inhaling in and exhaling out. Coming fully into the space, releasing where you've been, stop letting that anxiety build about where you're going, and instead come fully into this moment together. Welcome. We are going to be talking about the topic of all topics, unlearning white complicity. And I'm so excited by today's panel. One of them is a longtime bosom buddy, co-conspirator in troublemaking. My 7-year-old was just asking them, Auntie Robin, can you help me make some friendship bracelets? And before the sentence was even complete, Auntie Robin was like, yes! We are joined today by LTHJ Research Catalyst and Anti-Oppression and Belonging Facilitator, Teacher, and Researcher, Robin Counts. Also joining us, super exciting, is Joel Kampf, Anti-Oppression Teacher Facilitator, DEIB Leadership Coach, and Consultant, and creator of an amazing curriculum, which I hope we will get to explore today. And so put your seatbelts on, put your phones aside, grab out your pens and paper, because this is going to be, all right, I say this every time. I'm like, this is going to be a session you will not forget. But no, this one is it right here. You will never forget this forever, and you're welcome in advance. As always, Laura will send out our notes afterwards so you can go in and learn even more about our amazing panelists. But Joel, Robin, please come off of mute and come up on the virtual metaverse stage with me. Joel, what the heck is white complicity?
I think when I think about white complicity, I'm a word guy. Oh, by the way, thank you for the introduction and having me. And I think about complicity, which if you look in the dictionary, it talks about being involved with others in illegal activity or wrongdoing. So already it's another thing for me as a white person to have shame about and so forth. But so I can go that route. And I know that through my awareness and my learning that it is about white people helping to maintain and they're benefiting from white privilege contributes to the maintenance of systemic racism and structural racism. And it's really, really a difficult thing because it really comes from a lack of awareness. So when I think about unlearning complicity, I think about what do I need to learn to move forward to do some good. Because unlearning means, why are we at this place? How did we get to this place? And I know that shame's going to come up a lot in this conversation. And for me, my shame has been this lack of awareness that through so much of my life, I didn't even know what was going on. But I also realized to do any good and to truly become an actionable ally, I needed to get past that. And all of us, when it comes to unlearning complicity, I think it begins with really getting to know yourself better, really to become more aware and starting to realize that, yes, we are complicit as beneficiaries in white supremacy and so forth, but we didn't create it. White supremacy is responsible for structural racism, not every person. but it is our responsibility as white people to dismantle that racism and so forth. And so complicity is a tough one. It's a tough word. It's hard enough to get to. My goal in life, my mission is to create more allies. And for me to do that, because I know racism is not going to end in my lifetime, so I think that's where I can make a difference. For me to do that, I have to get people not only past their shame, but to feel good about themselves as a white person, to separate out being complicit, what you can do with it, and what you need to do to dismantle racism, which is to have a white positive identity.
Wow, wow, wow. We're at the point where let's come off a share so we can really look at one another. Even sitting on a panel and just being able to lean back into the role of questioner and be in my own state of curiosity, I think many of us find to still be uncommon. Often when we talk about race, we think it is for Black people to talk about. We think it is for Indigenous and people of color to be dealing with. And I hear you saying, oh, whoa, whoa. And, we were joking earlier, Caste is on your bookshelf there. Great book. I think we mentioned it every class. Dr. Isabel Wilkinson probably owes us some royalty money. But she says so beautifully that we've inherited this house. We didn't build it, right? We didn't build these constructs, but we've inherited this old broken down house, and it's our job to rebuild it. And so, Joel, this invitation to, we have an opportunity to interrogate the relationship that all of us have to the construct of whiteness, I think can be extremely eye-opening for many individuals. Robin, what's your definition of white complicity? Where would you take us?
Oh, it's so complex. I'm even coming to, how do we name this discussion today without centering white people and whiteness in a conversation where white people are not the most harmed. And so I really resonated with complicity because whiteness and people who are in that racial category, even though it's a false narrative, it's still a category in how we see each other. Whiteness is the reason, as Joel says, and we're complicit when we don't name and claim our socialization. And it's not always appropriate to name and claim our socialization because then we're centering whiteness. So it's this interesting circle. We all have healing to do to, look at our own internalized oppression, no matter where we are. We all have been, living in systems, all of us. And the US, and I know we got one person from South Africa at least here today, like the systems that hold race and have made race mean something have oppressed us, and many white people don't know it. So I think the complicity is in not understanding how our words and actions and breaths and relationships perpetuate that. And it takes, interrogation and healing and relationships and not asking the Black people in our lives or the people of color in our lives to tell us we're okay or validate us. We don't want to have the system of asking for approval because that's emotional labor. I could go on and on. As I feel like that's enough for complicity right now. Don't want to get too excited.
Well, you said this thing, first of all, shout out to Veronica in SA. You said this thing about white people are not the most harmed, which is an interesting statement. Are they also harmed in this system? Say more.
Yeah, in a racialized system, we're all part of it, and we're all, the things that white folks' ancestors have had to do to survive in it have harmed them. Like they've had to they've been socialized to, see violence and create hierarchies in our heads, right? Like some people's bodies mean more than others, built into the constitution of this country and then perpetuated. That the things that socialization does to all of us, those rules that we have, I look like this and therefore I do this, harms all of us. And until we're all free, we're not free. James Baldwin. Like it takes all of us to interrogate our identity, and to Joel's point, to find love there eventually, but also to see those things and to see how, it happens all the time. We were watching Sonia Renee Taylor and Ijeoma Oluo on Monday night, who came to Seattle's town hall, and I forgot what I was going to say about them, but but it was related to all of us getting free.
Yeah.
I went off topic, excuse me.
Well, thank you for going off topic. We did go see them on Monday night, and all I remember is everybody should adopt a Black woman. And so I'm available. Joel, first a question: were you cultured as male in this society?
Yes, white Jewish male.
Okay, I didn't want to assume. Go ahead.
No. Let me respond to one thing that was just brought up. As far as yes, we are all oppressed. Obviously, we as white people are the oppressors versus the oppressed. So it's a whole different degree of oppression. But the other thing, to move ourselves forward, we as white people, we need to we need to come to the realization that getting rid of racism helps us as much as anyone. Right. It's really important thing. And I'm going to kind of be a little redundant and say that it really does come back to looking at ourselves. White people seem to be the only racial group that spends more time and effort wondering about the implications of race for other groups than it does for itself. And that's part of the social conditioning that Robin's talking about as well. We just, it's really easy to talk about others and so forth, but we need to see whiteness as a really healthy part of ourselves rather than a negative aspect of others. And that's really a difficult thing when you're coming to terms with shame or the realization of not knowing that you're actually complicit in something that you had no idea was going on. But then all of our lives, we've been socially conditioned. I was on a podcast, being recorded on a podcast a couple of months ago, and I was telling the story. This podcast is with a white woman and a Black woman that have conversations. I think that's kind of the name of the podcast. And they were asking me about social conditioning, and I was talking about, how it starts so young, when you're holding an infant, a toddler in your arms, and the toddler says, "What's that, Mommy?" pointing to the first Black person they've ever seen. And they say, "Oh, they were put in the oven too long," And the woman on the podcast who was hosting the podcast said, "Oh my God, that happened to me." We're so unaware as white folks what people are going through every day. We're so unaware that I think W.E. Du Bois pointed out that, we as white people have one set of conditions that we have to respond to in culture. We have one lens to look through, where people of color have to look through the lens of being color and then look through the lens of the oppressors as well. So the conditioning is a huge thing. I don't know if I went on a tangent, but that's.
You're in the right place for tangents. On that, what you just said, my both by nature of my work and through that lens of double consciousness, one of the things that I think many people wonder is, what does this work look like for somebody who has moved through the world as a white male or white adjacent male? Sometimes there can be an outright rejection of the work altogether, the practice altogether. What and maybe why, in your experience, and especially in working with a lot of white-bodied men, what is often behind that?
Well, when you figure out, you have to be comfortable with being a white person to be able to do this work. as a white male. You have to make the decision to abandon racism. You have to be able to be aware of the ways racism is maintained in all our environments, the systemic and structural aspects of it. You have to learn the differences between the expression of racism and the expression of white culture, and discover what's positive about being white. You know, in my workshops, we do a little exercise that takes 2 minutes, where we say, everybody get a paper and pencil, and for 2 minutes, I want you to write down the answer to this question, everything that you can think about. What do you like about being white? And when everybody writes down all the stuff that they like about being white, I say, okay, now I want you to cross out anything that compares yourself to other racial groups. Then cross out anything that has to do with the word racist, and then cross out anything that involves defining yourself according to what you're not. And you find out that very, very few people, including myself, could come up with anything that's really that good about being white when you take those out of that. So to get people to be able to go through the phases of, you know, the awareness, and then recognizing, and then calling themselves to action. You know, my program first, I've got a program that I can do in all different lengths, but it goes from a lot of times 6 to 9 months. We spend the first month or so just looking at how we learn about racism before we even talk about it. How do we get out of the bias of learning that we have? How do we look at things more objectively? How do we have dialogue versus discussion? You know, discussion ends with the word cushion, you know, to break up things, percussion, concussion. It's where people are trying to win a point. How do we learn to have dialogue where everybody's, you know, learning from, there's no winners or losers and everybody's learning. And then when we start to, you know, develop the difference between subjective and objective thinking, blank slate thinking, and we feel more comfortable about looking at things more objectively, and then we determine where we are in the continuum of racism and their organization. Then we start going into the history. We got to know, you know, we talk about socialization, social conditioning. When did that begin? Why are we where we're at right now? And, you know, it was really interesting the other day. I was doing some research on social conditioning, and I saw a picture of the history book that I had when I was in elementary school, and it's called Exploring the New World. And there was nothing in it about slavery, racism, and indigenous genocide, so forth. So how do we learn how we got to that? All the way back to, you know, the 1660s, the Bacon Rebellion, when the word white was brought into our vocabulary in a way to separate, you know, poor white people with poor, you know, or indentured slaves, bonded servants and slaves, Black people. We needed to give them a one-upsmanship stuff. So when people start learning about the history, you know, one last thing, a kind of a quick history lesson. I do this little thing about who wrote this, you know, and I say, who wrote this? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by the Creator with unalienable rights. You know, everybody says life, liberty, and happiness, Thomas Jefferson. And I say, well, who wrote this letter? And in the letter, I'm going to read this one. It says, I make significant profit every year from the birth of slave children. I allow nothing for losses by death, but on the contrary, shall presently take credit 4% per annum for their increase over and above keeping up their numbers. Every farthing you have should be laid out in land and Negroes, which bring a silent profit of 5 to 10% per annum in this country by the increase in their value. Also written by Thomas Jefferson, just a few months before he wrote the Declaration of Independence. I didn't learn that in school. So there's a lot to teach people as to why we are where they are. And it's not about learning about social conditioning to make you just relieve your shame. It's just to give you a baseline of where we're coming from. So,
yeah.
Does that help?
Absolutely. I think there's, often when we introduce, and I'll just name, even at my household, why my children always are telling me, can you please not teach us at dinner tonight? You know, they come home learning about George Washington, and I say, and now let's learn about George Washington's slaves. And they're like, can we just eat spaghetti? Robin, in a personal way, how have you integrated into your day-to-day your own practice of rejecting white complicity? What what does that look like? Are there any offerings you can make to our community?
Such a huge question. Whew, yeah, I like it. I am committed to anti-racism, collective liberation above everything else. So that means if someone doesn't like me, and I'm a white-bodied woman, I'm socialized to be likable first, right? Small and meek, and those are the things society tells me about how to be, take up less space. I am more committed to anti-oppression than that socialization. So it means I'm reflecting, I'm, writing, I'm thinking about who I'm talking to. My husband's Black. We've been married 25 years, but before like I've been in multi-ethnic situations since I was born. This is not new to me. I was raised in hip hop, and I had 4 different Black women I was honored to get to call mom as a teenager. Like, I am in rooms because of my privilege, and it's my job to ensure that harm isn't done, that I'm not perpetuating harm. But it's not about me, it's about the situation. I want it to be safe and inclusive for everyone. I was telling you about a recent feedback at work, like, don't call people in, don't invite people to speak. They'll speak if they want to speak. And I'm like, oh my God, I am trying to make space, because where I come from, we invite people to speak and we ask their opinions. And but that's not the way we do it in corporate situations. Okay, that's super interesting. They're like, we understand your intent, but don't call on people. Like, and I'm like, I'm just inviting conversation. So it's about recognizing that I'm okay, even if I'm not liked, even if I'm grounded in this. It's about not asking my loved ones to approve of me. It's about managing my own my own feelings and beliefs, and getting support, but not from people that would be further harmed by these conversations. Yeah, how's that? More?
Yeah.
Less?
Well,
I could keep going.
What do you do when you have received feedback that you have inadvertently harmed?
I shut up and listen. I honor to the best I can the feedback I'm hearing, and take care of my own feelings separate from the feedback. I apologize in a big way, without asking for forgiveness or getting something from the person, but by owning my part in it, not justifying. I take time. I don't. I try to notice my need for immediacy and perfection, and am I doing it right? And do you like me? And try to just separate that so that I'm showing up in the way I intend to, which is healed enough to be accountable to anti-racism everywhere I am, to anti-oppression everywhere I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate the head nods here. Like, I'm talking and thinking out loud while we're here, and so knowing, just even seeing a little bit of feedback, I am cultured to work with community and not just to talk at you. So I appreciate the feedback I'm getting. It's helpful.
Isn't this the best community ever?
Super juicy.
I know. I look forward to it every month. Joel, I think I'm really digging in here on this intersectional identity of whiteness and those that are cultured as male, because still in a lot of these spaces, I find that we show up and the majority is, especially when we're talking about learning how to be an ally, how to be an accomplice, how to be a disruptor, in whiteness, I still predominantly see women. And so in teasing that apart, what I've heard from a lot of white-bodied men is I have no examples. And so I'm really leaning in here to ask you to impart something around, A, we have no kind of paradigm or the conditioning for men in a patriarchal white supremacist society is to always give the appearance of knowing, right? To appear as though you are not knowing is to risk status of maledom in our society. Two, it is opposite to what Robin's saying. Maleness is an invitation to space, right? If you've ever been on a bus and you're sitting next to somebody and you're literally like, are you literally so cultured to space that you have your legs spread out into my bus seat? Like, can we explore this together, stranger? They never seem to want to, but I, always start the conversation. What does this work look like for you on a personal, day-to-day, practical level? What are you eating for breakfast? No, just what does that look like for you, Joel?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned patriarchy, and you have to go back to that. That's so everything, the intersectionality, everything's so together. I kind of want to, every time I get in a room with or get on a Zoom call with a group of, I don't just work with white men, and I don't just work with white people, but for this particular work with white people, I just want to say first with the men, get over yourself already. I mean, let's talk about gender equality up front as well, because that's a huge prior to any people of color being held slaves. Women have been slaves the entire existence of humanity and so forth. So we talk about that, but my day to day, I know that the only thing I can really do, again, I'm repeating myself, is help develop more allies, and which is somebody who is aware and takes action and so forth. So to do that, I have to kind of, swallow my own medicine. I have to be objective. When I hear stuff, I can't get as emotional as I'd like to, as I feel. I have to let go of that emotion, and I have to go into a kind of a diagnostic mode. As a coach, I'm working with leaders as an executive coach. I'm working with leaders, and when I'm asking them questions, I'm always looking. I'm not sure how much you are read up on adult development or vertical development and the development scale of adults in their thinking about how to become more complex, strategic, systemic, and interdependent thinkers. But like the difference between, can you just think in terms of right and wrong, or black and white, if you will, or can you think in terms of gray and shades of gray and so forth? So my job on a daily basis, when I see somebody kind of pushing back, and I had an old dear friend of mine push back that he was colorblind, and when I told him what colorblind was, he still said he was colorblind. But instead of getting frustrated, I knew that, hey, I'm looking at it from a developmental scale. Where is he? He's not seeing that. What's he trying to say to me? He's trying to say that he's not a racist. He's trying to say that he's not prejudiced. So what other questions can I ask to help turn some lights on in his head to have him look at it different? So my day-to-day is I have this picture in my head when I get in my head that I put on a white lab coat and a clipboard so that I keep all my emotions out of it. So when I get into a room full of white folks or any folks, I try not to take things personally. I try to get them not to take things personally, and get away from the judgment, and do the same thing I ask my participants to do, is to really seek to understand versus seeking to be understood. So my job, I see it every day when I'm with white men, with white men in a room. We talk about gender. We tie in what's been going on with gender forever to what's going on since since 400 or 500 years ago with the white supremacy issue, and get people to start looking at it objectively, and take away the shame from it. To just don't make people feel like they should feel bad because they don't know about things. Look at them again objectively. What if you walked into a room and you have something wrong with you, into a doctor's office, and your doctor came in and he was looking at you and he was thinking about what he didn't like about you. Or, you know, I mean, how would you feel about the diagnosis being right on or whatever? So I have to remind myself day in and day out with every white male I talk to, every person I talk to, you know, that where's this person only doesn't know what they don't know because they've never been taught it. They're only not aware because they've been conditioned and they haven't been taught it. So I have to be kind. And, you know, it starts with being kind to myself and then kind to everybody else, and just look at them, you know, again, on a more objective level, and just saying, what do they need and what can I give them? And that's kind of my job in life.
Yeah. I mean, that's beautiful. And I'm laughing, Joel, because I'm like, oh, well, you actually described my experience at the doctor as a Black woman, right? First, I have to
Yeah.
explain that I'm sick, and it's not because I'm doing drugs. I'm sick because it's probably just like the flu or that time when I was pregnant. But different show on health and wellness. Robin, a lot of what Joel's describing sounds like your body of research around the anti-racism development journey. Can you speak to that a little bit? And before you say that, because I want to be respectful for the processors in the room, I'm going to step back because my lived experience is not of white-bodiedness. And so I'm going to invite you all to start thinking about your questions, getting them ready either for the chat window or aloud. Robin, can you tell us a little bit, echoing what Joel was talking about with the journey of personal development?
Yeah. I wanted to build on what Joel was saying, and I want to answer that. So I'm trying to connect these thoughts. The anti-racism or anti-oppression journey that it turns out we interact with forms of oppression or forms of identity in the same way. For some folks, we start with homogeneity, like we're raised to believe that whatever situation we're in is normal. So I'm going to speak just to race now. So I lived in Korea. There's homogeneity in race there, and so that's normal. And so it's harder in Korea to separate culture from race and family norms. And in a situation where there's more ethnic diversity, we're living in a time when we're having to figure out what's race, what's class, what are all these aspects of how did I get here, and how do I heal to be part of the collective, right? So we go from homogeneity to like tolerance to acceptance, like, oh wow, these systems exist, and then we have to manage our internalized oppression, the healing, and then it's possible to be a part of a reciprocal community across difference, right? And I'm not saying it's linear, but these are the patterns in general. And so to build on the shame and the shame aspect, like I think it's important for people to be able to sort of see where they are so they can make steps forward without doing more harm. I love to give the example of white women doing harm 2 summers ago when the wall of moms became the white women's whatever, and we took publicity from the Black families who have been organizing and raising voices and doing this work forever, but it became about these white women holding up signs as if folks weren't moms before they joined. Like there's so many things so many negative consequences to that. Intentions were good. They were at acceptance. We accept that the system is broken and we want to take action. So yes, thank you. Take the action. Like let's interrogate those whatever's going on and what you want to do. And then instead of trying to help or save or fix it, we'll help them. Like that perpetuates harm. So instead, what do you need to feel like you're doing something? Who could you support or amplify? I'm thinking about those actions, but also just wanting to speak to the shame. Like there is shame here. I have to take responsibility for what I represent in a room. and what I might represent to other people. And I have to get okay with it so that I can show up without, someone being able to push my buttons and make me cry, right? And so, like, I agree with Joel. We don't invite people in by making people feel bad. That we know that doesn't work, and I've been doing that my whole life. Like my dad and my brother, if they were here, would be like, oh yeah, like we're triggered when Robin opens her mouth because we're scared she's going to tell us we're saying it wrong or doing it wrong. Because early on in my 20s, I did that because I thought that was the right thing. But it's so much more than saying the right words or knowing the right concepts. This gentleman who was talking about colorblindness, like, yeah, it's hard for me to hear, like, oh, colorblindness harms people. We don't honor people when we talk about colorblindness. We don't celebrate or normalize differences. But if that person is focused on, I'm not a racist or I'm a good person, like that tells me where they are in the journey. And having a theoretical conversation about colorblindness isn't going to help them. Like they're repeating it, but meaning, I really I want to do the right thing. I just don't know how. Or I value different people, and I live in a country that has valued diversity. And I'm sorry I missed it, that things have been hard this whole time. I'm embarrassed and all the things, I'm supposed to be right. I'm supposed to know. They taught me wrong. How can this be? We have to wrestle with all of that as white people without folks of color laboring for our learning. Like, been saying that, not new, right? Then, and wrestle with that shame because it exists, it's real, and then find, love in our bodies and heal. This is the Resmaa Menakem's My Grandmother's Hands. Like, racism lives in our bodies. That is how we have been socialized, and we have to heal from it. I am sitting here struggling, as Joel says, we have to love our whiteness, but that's because I've got 49 years of being ashamed of it because of the relationships that I've been in. And so I'm still working on it. And sometimes I'm in a wee reciprocal space, and sometimes I got to get small because I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And I have to wrestle with it.
Yes.
Yes, it's a constant battle working with that. For me as well, I have all this curriculum about developing the positive white identity, but like Robin, it's just a constant battle. And the shame, shame was really hobbled me until I was able to look at it as an opportunity to take action and realizing the value in it. When I work with people to start pausing between, stimulus and response to figure out what's the best way to respond to something, I say, well, what's the value in what you're going to say for you and the other person? What's the value of being, shamed, feeling in shame? And when you see someone's in shame, even talking about it, is that the right thing to do? Because again, coming back to the objective, why are we in shame? As allies, to become allies, we want people to take action against oppression, not on behalf of those that are oppressed, but because justice has become our own value. And we can't do that if we're constantly feeling shame, So for me, then I put my white lab coat. Well, why are we feeling shame here, And as an ally, also, it's my job to, to call out other white people, and I use the term targets, and I didn't make it up. Targets and agents. Letitia Nieto's book that does a great job with it. Agents being those who are oppressing, and this is a only part definition, and targets those that are oppressed. It's our job as allies to look at agent institutions, expose agent norms, and so forth. But we have to understand that allyship is less about being politically correct and policing what's wrong, and more about really being compassionate and understanding that a lot of people that are agents who have shame, their armor, kind of this oppressive armor that they have, this complicity that they have that they don't even know they have, is a direct result of socialization, right? So when you can get people focused on that, and they can be focused on a specific subject that actually makes sense to them, they stop focusing on themselves and their own shame. So I think that's a big part of that, because becoming an ally depends on developing a positive white racial identity, and it requires us to witness. A great book by Shelley Talklick, Witnessing Whiteness. It requires us to witness, and we're not, as white people, we're just not very good witnesses to our own whiteness. Witnessing means more than like, shining light on stuff and saying these are where the inequalities are. We have to really clarify our own relationship to race and racial identity. And you can't do that if you're just stuck in the shames.
And that's the acceptance. You're stuck in acceptance. This happened and I don't know what to do with it. So that causes us to be quiet. That causes us to judge ourselves. We're in our own heads. And so, yeah, there's lots of ways to get it out, to heal, to unpack. And talking is one of them. Reading is, one of them. It has to be done in community because our heads were socialized. So, yeah.
Yeah. Which is so interesting. I've been having this ongoing conversation about Western psychology models. And, as much as I'm the first person to be like, here's the name of a good therapist, I also think that always going into a quiet, private room and never having the opportunity to get out of that room and practice exploring those things in community can also look like whiteness, right? At some point, you have to start getting courageous to move past the shame of, I can only talk about these things in isolation, to, I'm ready to talk about these things and I will no longer be shamed around my journey of mental health and wellness. I'm going to step back and invite you all to ask and question. And in a very rare kind of flip of how we normally hold space in these sessions, I'm going to ask those who have lived a BIPOC experience to create a container of community. And so what would you like to ask these practitioners and these facilitators? Levi?
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. My name is Levi. I use they, them pronouns. I'm with GSBA. And I just want to thank you all for having a vulnerable conversation about this. And I 100% agree that whiteness also is this idea of being right all the time. And it's not until we're like learning from others and about what's actually, oh, sorry, it's my dog, what's actually happened in our history. And I also understand that being a younger person, I have an extremely huge view of the world because I've always had access to the internet. So I'm like, so if you need to look something up, you just look it up. But so often when I'm met with folks who are not understanding and need a base level of like, why can't you just tell me 3 things I can do to not be racist? Like where, and I have a hard time, especially because I see those questions being asked to marginalized folks about whiteness and the complexities in the intersectionality of understanding that our histories as white people are histories of BIPOC people, of Indigenous people. Like we are not a monolith. And I just feel like when you start opening that conversation, it can feel like a social studies lesson or like a civics lesson. And I'm wondering if you have a place that you send folks to start.
Joel, do you want to go first?
Sure.
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to call you in. I just like, if
No,
you have,
no,
I
no.
have thoughts, go ahead if you want.
We're, what can you do? Again, I had mentioned this, it's really important for us as allies to know that justice has become our own value. I look at this, I look at the work, and I kind of look at it in a binary way, and that there's two kinds of white people: ones that want to hold on to their privilege, and ones who want to feel good about themselves as being white, but no, it's our responsibility to dismantle racism. And I add to that, without asking people of color how to do it, because that's not their job at all. This is all our job. So you're here. You're in the category of people who want to move forward in this. So you're already here, and you're already doing something. And I think part of when people start, well, I have some videos I give people to look at, things like redlining and so forth that they didn't understand. I have some recommended reading. Like I've got the three first books that I always ask people to read that we talk about when we're doing this work. The first one is The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. It's a really short little book, but it really gave me some perspective. And then I tell some stories that, when you're a younger person coming into this, it's really not any different than a person of my age coming into that. We're all thinking about it was so far ago. I'm also in a mixed race marriage, and when I was a teenager, it was illegal to be married, for me to be illegal to be married to my wife. So it wasn't that far away. And my we talk about things like lynchings. My wife's grandfather was lynched in Louisiana, in the 60s. So, I mean, these things to kind of show people that we're not talking about history, because people have a way of compartmentalizing emotionally and saying, well, that happened. Oh, that happened with that happened in 1600s, the 1700s. Well, obviously it's going on today. It's going on everywhere today. And obviously, I mean, especially when Lindsay brought up that's what happens when I walked into a doctor's office, So again, this comes back to this awareness. I mentioned The Fire Next Time because that first 10 pages of that book, it's just a 10-page chapter, and then I think about 50 more pages. That first 10 pages of book, a letter that James Baldwin wrote to his nephew, it put me in a space that I'd never even imagined. And the reason I read that book first when I started doing this work is because I was watching an article of Barack Obama and his book. So I read his book, and in it, and I like presidential history. They said, "What did you do the first time you were in the Oval Office?" And he said, "Well, the first time I was in the Oval Office, there was tons of people with me, but when everybody left and I had a couple hours to myself, I sat down and read The Fire Next Time for the 30th time." So I felt compelled to read that book. So again, and Caste is another one, and The Sum of Us. There's a few critical books like that. Caste was a really difficult book, and then I'll shut up, Rowan. But Caste was a really difficult book to read because I'm a Jew, and it talks about the Indian caste system, the American race system, and the Nazi system. And when I learned that the Nazis came to America to learn from the white supremacists here, and found out that we're actually more strict than they are when it comes to blood and being white. There's all kinds of stuff out there that'll get your mind going and start making you look at it more objectively. Sorry to go on. Go ahead, Robin.
No, I just want to add, I think for me, my approach has evolved. And where I'm at now is helping people to see where they are on the journey and what steps they can do to move forward. So information is sometimes helpful. Compassion is sometimes helpful. Listening is really helpful. It depends. The most important thing is for me to not have it be about me. And what did I teach them? And am I good? And did I do it well? Because that's not the point. The point is to support them in their journey. And so I've been in anger for a lot of years because I've been trying to name this and been gaslit by my family and friends for a long time. And so it has not been helpful for me to try to work with white people on this. As the healing continues, because it's not new to me, because it's not, yeah. And so I think it's about meeting people where they are and helping them to feel connected to the work and to see themselves in the work. So I'm listening for the ways that their identity has shaped them and what can they relate to, how do they think? What we talk at LTHJ about Enneagram. How does their mind work? Are they looking for a lot of data? Are they looking for connection? Are they looking to feel like there are other people who are along the journey with them? And then just meeting them where they are. I also have big lists of books recommendations depending on where you are on the journey, and we can get those out to the group too. And they include the books that Joel named, so we're all on the same page.
Two things. One, I would remind anybody who's new to this space that we are not bound by Western concepts of time in this space. And so there will be a natural end that we will come to. But we understand if you are in the middle of a day that is operating by Western constructs of time and you have to exit, you will not be shamed. Two, I just, on that, Robin, because we've have been holders of one another's journey, as I've been healing from internalized racism, as you have been further unlearning white complicity. And so I would just, as someone who bears witness to your life, I've noticed the more that you have unlearned white supremacy, the more graceful you have become with other white-bodied individuals, right? So moving away from
Thank you.
that perfectionism. Dustin.
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to give a shout out to the panelists and just thank them for doing the work. It's not easy. And, we obviously, as people of color, we need white people to do the work. So just want to thank y'all for doing the work.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dustin. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Yeah. Hannah?
Hi. I don't know that I have a question either, but I don't know that maybe I'm looking for some advice or guidance or words of hope. But I'm just listening and sitting here thinking about the ways that we're talking about how we've been socialized as white body people. Joel, I think you mentioned specifically like a history book from when you were taught history. And I'm just reflecting on the things that we are seeing that are happening across our country right now, where we can, refer the Don't Say Gay bill or things similarly to it. This movement that anything that feels like anything that mentions race or mentions slavery is labeled as critical race theory, and that is harmful to others or to white people and must be eliminated. And then I'm trying to balance, this conversation with Lindsay's knowledge and speaking that it's going to take, 7 generations for us to move through all of this. So again, I don't know that I have a question. I'm just thinking about all of that in my head, and I'm wanting to hear your thoughts about all of that as well.
Got words. I'll go. And then Joel, I'll pass quickly to you. I think that the shame and fear is at the root of the wanting to label it. I read 15% of a book called Woke Racism by a man who the book is talking about the cult of religion that is woke racism or something. There's this attempt to kind of other the folks that are getting this knowledge, and I'm fascinated, like, where do I fall? It's not new to me, like but I've made mistakes over the years. Am I one of those people? I don't think it matters. The point is to label some of those behaviors so that in our brains we other those people that are doing that work. It feels to me like it comes from fear and otherness and sense of identity. So when I talk about anti-oppression, I mean all the ways that we experience systems. And so now I've got stereotypes in my head, so I will try not to perpetuate any. I'm thinking about white folks who don't have natural reciprocal relationships with people of color, and having that perpetuation of othering, and what lessons they learned about themselves and what that's about. And it feels like we're trying to label the change makers as bad in order to keep those identities whole, instead of healing, looking through, talking about class and money and identity and history and all of these bits that come together. So it hurts my body to hear about the critical race theory. It's a struggle, but it's also not new. Like, these things are getting more publicity, but this shit's been happening since we found it, and it's in it's just new that we have the internet and that we're talking about it more. So it's good, but also, we're seeing the fear. We have healing to do. And I think that's one of the things that motivates Joel and I, is like, there is work to do to help those folks. And the more it's decided that people that are talking about race are bad, hey, I'm a good white person, you don't call me a racist. I support the good systems. I didn't do anything wrong. Like, all of those arguments are not helpful. I'm now passing to Joel.
Yeah, this is like what's going on in the world today, and the government and the world, and how how the word woke, which I was led to believe is a good word, is now a bad word, and all these things that are going on since the whole Trump debacle started. It's one of the things that upsets me most in this world, and I think that has to do when we spoke earlier. I think it was Levi speaking about being younger. I'm 67 years old, and I feel like everything has gone backwards in the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, what the hell? I lived through the 60s in LA, and everything has gone backwards. What's going on? And I get real emotional about it. So again, I know I'm probably beating a dead horse here. How do I get it to be less emotional in my mind? How do I, use my rational brain on this stuff? And I think, well, you know what? This is expected, what's going on for me right now in my head. This is just my thought, and I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist or anything, because I'm not. But this is kind of expected from the people who brought you white supremacy. We've got 22 years down the road. There's going to be 22 to 25 years down the road, whites are going to be a minority, and this is the last gasp of white supremacy rearing its ugly head. And it's not going to get better in the next few years. It's going to get worse. But when I frame it like that, and I realize that there is some finite aspect to it, I still work to do what I can do with the people who are not wanting to hold on to their privilege, and think about it in those terms. Because when I look and see the pull out names, Mitch McConnell's of the world or Lindsey Graham's of the world out there, just hurting people day in and day out. When I was a kid, I thought that senators and congressmen was something I thought were the most incredible people in the world. They had all this power for good and everything like that. To see all that change and to see these folks, I'm realizing they don't care. When we live in a world that I say one thing today and then I can lie about it tomorrow, and see them next to each other side by side on the frame and say, well, too bad. They don't care because they are afraid. They are scared. Their privilege is slowly going down the drain. Now, people of color and all other oppressed folks, whether it's religion or gender, sexual orientation, whatever it is, all oppressed folks, they might not feel it yet. They probably don't. Change isn't coming that fast, but it is coming. When you look at the amount of how quickly the white race is slowly becoming the minority. So I look at that as I try to frame that and say, this is not unexpected. And again, it's like shame. I saw something in the chat about shame, it slows you down. And it's the same thing here. If I get hung up on the fact of how, as an educator, I was a teacher for 15 years. As an educator, when I see the, books, we can't read Huck Finn or To Kill a Mockingbird or whatever anymore. I can get super, super upset, which I do, but then I try to be mindful about it and say, okay, that's how I feel, but how can I respond? How can we all respond? Part of my response is saying to myself, this is kind of what you'd expect for somebody who's losing their power. They're gonna and who created the worst power hierarchy in the history of mankind or womankind or all kind, and all of a sudden they're losing it. This is expected. So I bring that. It doesn't give me any peace, but allows me to work through the anger and the disappointment and try to move forward with doing something that's going to have a positive impact and help people who are still struggling.
The only thing I would add there, not to have the last word, but humans, as we're often reminded, are belonging and connection animals. And we desperately desire it. And the more that we learn to belong to ourselves first, and then if you really want to do this work and practice this work, first go home and practice it there, right? How are you not enacting adultism on your children? How are you not demanding perfectionism from your lover? How are you not avoiding uncomfortable conversations and learning how to set up boundaries while still being loving, in your assertion of those boundaries? Even in this space, don't forget, what we practice in this space is the work. We come together from so many different places without even knowing where we all came. And here's the beauty of technology. And yet we meet and we have uncomfortable conversations and we normalize it across so many intersectional identities. And hopefully our deepest wish, and I know especially Laura, is they are the creator of this space, is that you walk away from here and you go, can I extend this for another 5 minutes, maybe 30, maybe an hour, maybe I'll, after next month's session, extend it into the next day, and then 48 hours, and so on and so on. The other thing that I think is a good reminder is, thank God that we are not vengeful in general, Black people, right? Because as I was sharing on Instagram recently, I never saw a Black woman CEO with locks in my childhood, right? My mother, not the same as Joel, but my mother grew up in the segregated South and would be the first to tell you that she hated when her school was desegregated because all of a sudden she didn't have any Black teachers anymore, right? But there was no vision yet for her that her daughter would become the CEO of a company with locks, because as an HR leader, she used to say, I wouldn't hire you. But look how much has changed. And what is exciting about that is that not only has it changed, but I am not vengeful. I am thinking about the world that I want to create for my children. And thank God that that is what I do. And so the constancy in our human potential, and that we might move towards it and that we might meet it and achieve it, I think keeps all of us coming back together to this space, because we know something inside us calls to us that it is possible. And it is an imperfect practice, but it isn't a practice that every one of us is attending to. And I think despair is the retreat of the coward. It's good to be with you again today, friends. continue on your journey. And next month, I look forward to ceding the floor to the GSBA, we hope, and to be among you as a listener and a participant. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Lindsay. Bye-bye.
Thank you, my darling Veronica. I know it must be late in SA.
It is late, yeah. And Robin,
Yeah.
how lovely to see you. And Joel, it was a lovely listening to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for
I
being
look
here.
forward to the next one. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers, my darling. Yeah, we always find that whenever everybody hangs up, the panelists always go, and here's what I wanted to say. Robin, pick us up. What came up?
Oh yeah, so all oppression is connected. I wanted to talk more about the role of anti-racism and anti-oppression, just how our identities play a role in that, because I didn't mean to imply that we all were experiencing the same amount of oppression. And most of the other things I felt like I said in general, but as we talk, more is going to come up. Right now, I'm just like, done. That's a big one. Yeah. How about you, Joel?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to share, and it didn't work into, when you start talking, you just start talking. But that trying to get white people to see whiteness as a healthy part of themselves, and rather than a negative aspect of others and so forth, looking at themselves without that shame and so forth, and to become an ally or to become an anti-oppressive, social justice warrior, if you will, is a something big to bite off and chew on. So I wanted to point out that that to become an ally, there's a lot of ways people do it. The way I do it is, it's through 5 stages. This is stuff that I borrowed and made my own. I didn't come up with all this stuff. To develop a white positive racial identity, there's 7 stages. It's not something that happens at once. It's breaking things into bite-sized pieces, and it's not about becoming something quickly. It's about just starting with stage 1 and not worrying about the rest of the stuff and learning it, moving to stage 2, and getting people to feel really, really good about moving forward. That's what it's all about. If they're moving forward in their attempts to either learn or become this or that, then they're doing great, and they should, and that gives them the opportunity to stop kicking themselves in the ass and start patting themselves on the back a little bit more, which is really needed if you're going to eventually feel good about your whiteness. So I wish I would have shared that.
Well, and because when we focus on the shame or how we're feeling or how we're doing it right, then our energy is not going towards the progression. Like then you gotta feel that and get to the heart of it, but you gotta keep going. And
right.
I think we're like the shame or guilt and seeing those things stops us instead of continuing on the continuum.
Right. And I felt some guilt during this thing for a second, and tell me what you think about this, because I can't get over it when things happen to me like this. But when I talked about how it's our job as white people to dismantle racism without asking people of color how to do it. And then the one person of color who spoke, I don't remember his name, said, I wanted to thank you for doing this. And I felt shame and guilt for just being thanked. The part of me right then wanted to say, please don't thank me. I should be doing this, period, and it's weird that I kind of default to that shame and guilt if somebody even thanks me for this. But that's my own growth edge.
Naming that, I think it's been interesting because our last 2 sessions, we've had a Black, I happen to know Dustin, and so I'm assuming based on what I saw in terms of melanated, but the appearance of a Black woman thing. And it is interesting. There's obviously, it feels authentic to them, to share that in that moment. So you don't want to deny it, that authentic expression that's obviously coming from them. And I see your point in that in this work, it shouldn't be looking for the thanks, looking for the acknowledgement and praise, right?
Yep.
Right. Because I can't put myself in his place. I know that for sure. But if I were to, like, you know, if it doesn't stop me in my mind from trying, because if I was in his place, I wanted to say, instead of saying thank you, I would say, it's about fucking time.
Mm.
You know, that you're doing, you know, that you white people are doing this, you know, so that's something I have to learn to work with. And I'm going into a workshop later this week with a group of, you know, a mixed group, if you will. And, you know, I'm going to bring up some of that stuff and ask, you know, people of color with white people in the room about how I'm feeling about this and what they have to, you know, how they respond to when I say, I would have said it's about fucking time. There's no way I need to be thanking you. This shouldn't happen in the first place, type stuff. But again, we can't help what thoughts come into our mind.
It's so hard to be graceful in that moment. Go ahead, Lindsay.
No, I was just going to say, it's so interesting because I would say in the spaces that I find, it is more often than not the white social justice warrior who is saying to other white people, it's about fucking time. Whereas Black people tend to, and so there's a whole thing is that about internalized racism? Is that about just the nature of the grace that you learn for people in having a marginalized existence? I think it's an extremely complex thing to interrogate, because I find, and Robin and I have spoken about this often, that white people are the most unforgiving of other white people on the journey.
But
I agree with that.
I mean, it's because we're associated, right? Like, I don't want to be associated with that. I feel like we were acknowledged as individuals who are doing something out of our social norms, but it's difficult to be graceful in that interaction because I'm not doing enough. I can never do enough. Like, I've been doing this all this time and it doesn't matter. Like, it's so frustrating. But that's not what they're saying. They're saying, I have compassion for the journey that you are on. So it was more comfortable for me today than I've been going to protests with my neighbor whose family is from Ethiopia, and there's a war going on in the Tigray region, and I'm often the only white person there. So recently, when I go, people come up to me and thank me for being there. And I've said, you know, I've said all kinds of dumb things in response, because I just am like, that all I'm doing is showing up. You know, like, I sometimes I say, of course, and then I'm like, but I don't go to everything, you know, like, there's just all of that stuff there. But what I hear myself saying right now is that it's about the individual, and just like, I see you.
I laughed when you said that, because I wanted to say, I bet my dumb things are dumber than your dumb things. I mean, it's really hard not to, you know, I mean, it's for a guy who spends so much of his time trying to separate my opinions and assumptions, my subjective thinking, my objective, in those types of situations. You know, you said when you're the only white person there. When I was with you know, the first few times when I was dating my wife, and we'd be in places, I remember specifically we were on a ferry from Bainbridge, because I used to live on Bainbridge, and we were on a ferry from Bainbridge, and I, you know, I started noticing almost everywhere we go, she's not only, you know, the only Black person in the room, or the only person of color in the room ever. And then I started thinking about the school to prison pipeline, and started thinking about how, you know, where I would have been as a young Black person who has no self-esteem. When I was a kid, I had really low self-esteem.
Mm.
And I would have been in either dead or in prison if I was the only person in the room of my color my whole childhood. I didn't have the strength that my wife has, that her parents helped her have, and so forth too. So it's there's so much emotion attached to it. It's really, really difficult. It's really difficult for someone like myself to try to be unemotional and objective about the most emotional stuff.
It's not,
You
there's
have
no
to be
objectivity.
both, Joel.
Yeah,
You have to give yourself permission to be both, in that if you block out the emotions fully, they will reside somewhere else in the body. Cancer,
right.
brain aneurysm, something. So you have to feel it fully and not over identify with the emotion. It's the both and, not the
Right. I mean, I try, it's mindfulness. It's about honoring the emotions and then saying, okay, I feel them, how do I respond? But that, sometimes doesn't happen before the dumb stuff comes out of my mouth when I'm put in that same position Robin was in,
Exactly. And there comes the grace.
Yeah,
Mm.
hopefully, but good
Robin?
stuff.
Pardon?
Did you have a thought?
I did. I'm trying to determine if it's helpful. I was thinking about, the what we do when we compare, if I had to do that or if I were in that situation. And it's also like, I'm going to go on a super limb here, but like there isn't white culture. So if I were the only person, like I didn't learn interconnected, like those, there are things that are not built into my culture and history and experience. I'm not saying all Black people have that, but like we are prepared in different ways for different lived experiences. The conversation that we had to have with our son at age 11 about, playing Nerf guns in the forest with white friends was not the conversation that his white friends were having with their parents.
Exactly.
The books that we're, all of our, because we are have been mindful of this, our experience is different. Our acceptance is different. And I too, if I were the only with the upbringing that I had, if I were the only, I would not have survived. It's amazing that I survived not being the only. I mean, because I kind of was, but anyway, like there's something about, I was a little bit uncomfortable about like strong women, just the stereotype of strong Black women, and you were honoring and also thinking about that. So anyway, my sociology brain was just getting all geeky about what's what, what's.
Well, yeah, and we're cultured to be strong and Black women, right? So it's like you have this muscle that you also kind of have to allow to atrophy. You have to unlearn that.
Yeah.
Right. Which has been my practice around, I'm going to cry in public, which maybe now in my adulthood has happened like 3 times, maybe. Nailing it. But it's the way I watch white-bodied individuals unlearn perfectionism or upper class, let's call it, perfectionism, sense of urgency, blah, blah, blah. Really unlearning that, almost similar to the way we culture men. You may not have access to an emotional world. Has been a real practice. So again, it's seeing the socialization. I have a muscle that's been extremely strengthened, and then deciding when it's useful and when it's not useful. I have a question, which I didn't know if it was the right time or I definitely didn't feel like it was the right time to ask on the call, but in terms of this language around whiteness and white identity, and you kind of named it there, Robin, I find when I'm speaking with white-bodied individuals, which also seems like such a great privilege, it's like stop identifying with this construction and instead go discover your Irish heritage or your Gaelic heritage or your Lithuanian or Roma, or, it just seems like it's actually accessible to you. 23andMe is like for you, Holmes. Like, is it whiteness or is it your indigeneity?
That's a double-edged sword, because when you're working with people through the stages of developing a positive white identity, you have the earlier stage, the earlier stages where people say they don't identify as white. Oh, I'm Irish, I'm Jewish, and that, so when you have people, utilizing that as an excuse to say that I'm not white, to separate themselves, it tells you right exactly where you are. When I started reading about, my father was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and I started reading about Brooklyn in the 19th century, where I'm an Ashkenazi Jew from Central Europe, and when the Sephardic Jews came from Spain and south of Spain into Africa, they were just treated like shit by the Ashkenazi Jews, because the Ashkenazi Jews were trying to pass as white, right? So there's a whole history tied to that as well. So yeah, to learn about it is, I think, really, really important. But you have to be aware that then people can latch onto that. And then there's another stage of development you have to go through to unlearn that. Does that make sense?
Yes, that was beautifully put. And I'm
excited to see the framework. Yeah.
Yeah, context is everything, right? Yeah, you two need to get your research together and have a research date.
I'm excited about that.
Couple of nerds.
Yeah, everybody at LTHA Global is a nerd, so we all fit right in.
Exactly.
Yeah.